Hi and welcome to My Boss Doesn't Understand Me, or How to Successfully Convince Your CEO to See Your Point of View. My name is Janice Sutherland and I'll be leading you through this webinar. Now, I chose this topic very carefully as I've heard so many HR professionals lament about the difficulties they have convincing their boss to see their point of view, to approve a project, to take a particular course of action. It's hard work and they feel exasperated. Now, does this sound familiar? You have a meeting scheduled with your CEO. Your one goal is to convince her to spend $50,000 on a training program you know will be beneficial for the team. You've prepped a presentation, you know the program you want to propose inside and out. This is your chance and you really don't want to blow it. 15 minutes later though, you walk out of the boss's office thinking, what just happened? Didn't she hear how great the proposal was? You ask yourself, how can we possibly be from the same species, let alone the same planet? It seems obvious that your boss just doesn't understand you. But before we get into the meat of the presentation, let me share why I'm highly qualified to turn you into a CEO whisperer. I'm a 2-time award-winning executive coach and leadership development expert with a professional leadership career spanning over 25 years with prestigious multinationals in the UK and the Caribbean. And I'm an experienced CEO, having been the first woman to head up the telecoms sector in Antigua and Montserrat for telecoms giant Digicel. Now I head up my own business in leadership and development, providing customized, performance-focused coaching and training for both emerging and new leaders. Plus, I provide executive coaching to enhance the skill set of C-suite and senior leaders, so I know what makes a CEO tick. So let's get into it. Oh, and a heads up, there'll be a quiz at the end, so pay close attention. So let's start with My Boss Doesn't Understand Me, how to successfully convince your CEO to see your point of view. Now, the first thing I want to say is that convincing your CEO really isn't as difficult as you think. I know it can be challenging and I know sometimes it can be very frustrating trying to get your point across. But once you've cracked, dare I say, the code, you'll know how to convince your boss going forward. But before we kick off, there are 2 things you really need to be mindful of, or there's 2 parts to the whole process of having this important conversation, of being able to convince your CEO to see things your way. The first part we're going to deal with is the credibility of HR. And I'm saying the credibility of HR, but what I really mean, more importantly, is the credibility of you, as you are the representative HR. You may be the only face people see of HR in the organisation. You may be one of many, or it may be you alone. But basically, right now, in that moment when you're talking to your CEO, you are the face of HR. And the second element of successfully convincing your CEO is being able to communicate clearly and well enough to gain your CEO's interest. So before we kick off, let's go into it. Let me share the story of Sharon. You'd have seen her at the introduction of the presentation. Now, Sharon had been in her current HR manager role for almost 12 months. And she had worked really hard to get there. She had lots of qualifications and she had the experience she'd gained in her previous role in another industry. She hadn't really had much time to really get to know her colleagues in the business, in the current business, as when she wasn't firefighting day-to-day HR issues, she really spent a lot of her time building a large business case, which she was sure would make her a shoo-in, a strong candidate for promotion. As part of the management team, she would have to attend weekly management meetings, pretty straightforward. And during the meetings, her boss would go round the table and discuss the projects each department were working on and ask the resources they needed from the organisation. And every week she would watch other managers talk about their projects and get the resources they asked for. And when it came to her turn, she would explain her project and, of course, the resource she needed. And sometimes she'd get the support she was looking for, but most of the time she didn't. And this particular situation she found incredibly frustrating, really, to put it mildly. She was even more concerned about the situation because she had a major proposal. Remember I said she was working on that large business case that she wanted to put forward and really didn't want a mediocre outcome or a no outcome. So she came to me asking, how can we get past this impasse that, what was she doing that her colleagues were doing that wasn't helping her get forward? So what we identified were basically three elements, three things that she was doing. The first was results. Her peers talked about their projects in terms of bottom line results, what it was going to achieve and what it was going to bring to the business. Secondly, they used ROI, they used metrics and numbers and really voiced the return investment any proposal or any project they were putting forward would have on the business. Whereas in comparison, Sharon actually expressed her results in terms of what would make the employees feel good. Yes, an important aspect of the role of what was needed, but not in comparison to how her colleagues were explaining the situation, the outcomes for them. So we're going to have a little pop quiz because there was something else that Sharon's colleagues did that she didn't, and it's a multiple choice, so let's start with that. The first thing was A, did they produce a 30-minute PowerPoint presentation outlining their proposal? Or B, share the success results of their previous projects and ask for their boss's support of their current proposal? Or C, told their boss all the reasons they ought to take the proposed plan of action? So you have 10 seconds to give your answer. Okay, so let's see if you guessed correctly. If you guessed B, share the success results of their previous projects and ask for the boss's support of their proposal, give yourself a big tick. Well done. That's exactly what they were doing differently to Sharon. But it didn't stop there. We actually looked to dig a lot deeper into the challenges she was facing with communicating with her, not only just the CEO, but also her peers. Now, what we also identified is that Sharon hadn't spent much time in really building her credibility in the organisation. You might even call it her personal brand. Now, I may upset a few people here, but there are some who wrongly assume that the CEO will be inclined to listen to them because they are HR professionals and the letters they have say so. Sharon was one of them. She incorrectly assumed that this was all she needed to perform well in her role, when in reality the CEO is focused on one thing. Really, when it comes to your job, is are you the person that can deliver? The only people who care about the string of letters from your professional body after your name are other people with the same letters. So basically, qualifications unfortunately do not always equate to credibility. Experience and industry knowledge really does go a long way. What matters is to our leaders is whether you as a HR professional share their passion for what they do and on focus on enabling them to do it. So can you do the job and can you help them achieve what needs to be achieved? The second thing was networking. Now, as much as you may dislike it, networking is a very powerful tool to have in your arsenal. It doesn't have to be drinks at the bar. It could be as simple as spending time with your colleagues in their department, talking to the CEO's PA and finding out what makes them tick, even using social media to connect with others in your industry. The goal here is to both widen your knowledge and reach, because sometimes It's not what you know, it's who you know. And building those important relationships can actually reduce future headaches. The third thing was being proactive, is you being proactive. As I explained earlier, Sharon had spent a lot of her time firefighting, being very reactive, and instead of identifying solutions. In fact, when we dug deeper into her proposed project, that big business case she was working on, it was really something she was really passionate about and hadn't given much thought as to how it aligned with the business. Now, we tackled all those points, as you can imagine, and built a personal development plan to address those areas. But when it comes to being proactive is better than being reactive, and look for real solutions for real problems. So, you've worked on part one. As I said, there were 2 parts to this, and part one was building your credibility. The second part, let's move on to part 2, is how do you successfully convince a CEO? Well, the first thing to look at is, what are your CEO's hot buttons? And by that I mean, you need to seek to understand the CEO's perspective. What really excites them? What are their buttons? What are they most focused on? And to do that, you really have to do your initial research. Ask questions. Maybe I talked about talking to the CEO's PA. Ask questions, listen, learn. What does a CEO think about particular topics when you're in meetings, and why? You are there to learn as much as you can about what their hot buttons are. And what I'm asking you to do in this moment, when you're looking at that, is to forget about your agenda or your needs for a moment. This is really understanding what your CEO is looking for, and what really would pique their interest in anything your proposal. The second thing is to reflect the CEO's perspective to their satisfaction. Now, this step can be really difficult because the goal is to restate the CEO's perspective without putting your personal slant on it. And the step can be really hard. Most people can't objectively reflect or restate another person's perspective about a topic without putting their own personal slant on it. And at this step, as I said, you must restate the CEO's perspective on the topic simply and without putting words in their mouth or really trying to spin it in your favour. You will definitely know when you've succeeded in this step once the CEO says the magic word. Can you guess what that magic word is? Exactly. The magic word is exactly. That means once they say that, you have fully understood where they're coming from and their perspective. This means that the CEO believes they've understood their perspective, and then and only then have you earned the permission to move to the next step. But while we're talking about perspective, the one thing to really note here, to realise, is, do you as the HR professional need to change your perspective? Human nature sometimes dictates that we have a very self-centered view and on what we view and how we do things. But there are benefits that you could derive from seeing things from the perspective of not just your CEO but others in your team. You could build self-awareness and take greater control over how your CEO perceives you, because remember, perception is reality, and I always say that. You can connect with your colleagues on a deeper level and learn how they work. It's another element of networking and getting them on your side to support your proposals when you put them forward. Clarify organisational goals and projects more effectively once you really understand the perspective of others in the conversation and what you're proposing. And lastly, it can increase your ability to make decisions far more collaboratively and quickly. But probably lastly, when it comes to the CEO, the one thing what I would say is, have you defined WIFM? And WIFM stands for what's in it for me. Basically what's in it for them going ahead with your proposal. So you have proposed your idea as a way to help the CEO achieve her goals. That's what you're looking at. And you have to adopt the mindset that you are about to convince the CEO to do something that is really, really good for them. And the easiest way to propose your idea, easiest way, put it forward such as your goals are X, your concerns are Y, so I'm proposing you do Z or Z. And that's the simplest way, words to that effect, that you've understood their goals, you've understood the concerns, what keeps them up at night, and you're given a proposal that will alleviate some of those concerns. So what else can you help you achieve that great communication with your CEO? There are a couple more things you could do as a HR professional. The first thing is understand the key industry metrics for your organisation, or your KPIs. And there are two questions you really need to ask yourself when it comes to understanding these metrics and understanding what matters, what numbers matter to the business. The first question to ask yourself is, do I know and understand what is measured? Now you may know it, but you need to seek to understand, and that's really important, because once you understand why these measures are measured, you'll have a better understanding of the impact what you're proposing will have on these all-important numbers. And secondly is, can you calculate how your proposed actions will impact the KPIs? Now it may be at first glance you look at it and think, I don't know how that's going to happen, but every action you do will translate to something on the core KPIs of a business, whether that's employee retention, whether that's absenteeism. All those numbers will some way track back to a core KPI in the business. So it's your job to know what those numbers are and whether any of those numbers or those KPIs will be impacted by what you're proposing, be that negatively or positively. The next thing is to keep current with external business trends. And another two questions you can ask yourself here is, how can I keep myself informed of the business trends or the organisational trends or the industry trends that may impact my organisation? And the second thing is to actually understand what trends could impact your organisation. So now we've tackled those points, there are a couple of things you need to be aware of as to how not to convince a CEO. So a couple of home truths here, and as I said, former CEO, so I know what I'm talking about. The first thing is show up and throw up. That's an absolute no-no. So what do I mean by that? Many people show up and throw up and basically push a lot of information at the CEO, whether that's verbally or giving us death by PowerPoint. And I'm not sure why many unpersuasive people really follow this approach. Maybe it's the goal to show you know what you're talking about, but it doesn't relate to making the CEO saying yes. So don't push a lot of information at the CEO, either verbally or by PowerPoint. The second thing is to say we ought, or to rephrase your request as we ought. We ought to. CEOs don't decide to do things just because other people say they ought to do something. Or worse yet is when people only talk about why they want something to happen, fully ignoring the wishes, concerns and perspective of the CEO. Basically, CEOs don't decide to do things just because other people say they should. So let's recap, because as I said, there is a short quiz to do at the end of this webinar. So let's see what you've learnt and let's see how we can get you a great grade passing that. So there are four key points you need to take away from this webinar. The first one is build your credibility, build HR credibility, build your personal brand. Network with your peers, either internally or externally. Get to know your industry so you can converse or at least understand what the core things that impact your business, and when the conversations are being had, you can participate effectively. The second thing is to understand or be aware of your CEO's objectives. And when you're making that proposal, when you're putting things forward or trying to get your point across, how will what you're proposing make your CEO's life easier? Is it in keeping with their goals and objectives? Will it make a difference to what they're trying to achieve? Number 3 is the organisational triggers, or your KPIs. What keeps your CEO up at night? What are those numbers? So look at your KPIs and the external factors, external trends that are happening in the business. Be aware of those. And finally, the do's and don'ts. Take the less is more approach when you're presenting your ideas. CEOs really don't have time to spend hours looking at your proposal. They're relying on you to pick out the main and salient points so they can make a decision. And what the CEO needs to know in their presentation is what should they know and what do they care about, and those are highlighted in your presentation or whatever you're proposing that particular point. And let me just end on a final note. Most CEOs aren't heartless. I know I focused on the numbers and the objectives, but senior management really does care about their employees and their engagement with the organisation. But the fact is, it's not all a CEO has to care about, or the team has to care about, or have responsibility for. So, quiz time. How to convince your CEO? Head over to this bit.ly link to complete the quiz and see how well you got on. So that's it. And I hope you found the information useful, and go out and start whispering in your CEO's ears. Don't forget to complete the online quiz. And if you'd like to know more about what I do, or just to keep in touch, connect with me on LinkedIn at I am Janice Sutherland. Take care.